The sky over Portland was a flat sheet of gray the morning Richard Collins was buried. Rain had fallen softly all night, the kind that left everything damp but never quite satisfied the thirst of the earth. Margaret stood beneath a black umbrella, her gloved hands clenched around the handle like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her husband of 36 years now lay beneath 6 feet of cold, wet soil, and she felt nothing. No tears, no collapse, just silence. Ethan stood beside her, his posture tense, eyes bloodshot but dry. Emily, his wife, stood close to him, her arm gently looped around his. She kept glancing between him and Margaret, uncertain who needed more holding. Neither of them reached back. After the final words were spoken and the small group of friends and extended family began to disperse, Margaret remained rooted in place. The groundskeeper hesitated behind her, shovel in hand. "Mom," Ethan said softly. "We should go." She didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed locked on the freshly turned earth, as though waiting for something, or someone, to rise from it. Finally, she exhaled. "Yes," she murmured, her voice rasping like old paper. "Let's go." The ride back to the house was silent. Margaret sat in the back seat while Ethan drove, and Emily stared out the passenger window. No one spoke, and the windshield wipers moved rhythmically like a metronome ticking off the seconds of a life that no longer made sense. The Collins home, nestled in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of the city, was an old wooden craftsman-style house, heavy with history and sorrow. The house groaned in the wind as they entered, as if mourning along with them. Margaret went straight to her room and closed the door. Emily stood in the hallway, looking after her. "Do you think she's okay?" she asked Ethan quietly. "She's managing," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think she just needs time. But time doesn't always heal." Days passed, then weeks. The house remained heavy with the absence of Richard. His chair in the living room stayed empty. His voice, which once echoed down the hallway in morning grumbles and late-night humming, had vanished completely. Margaret moved like a ghost. She cooked only for herself, declined visits from neighbors, and spoke little to Ethan and Emily unless it was absolutely necessary. But at night, the lights in her room stayed on until dawn, and the quiet hum of music could be heard. Old vinyl jazz records spinning endlessly on the player Richard had loved. One evening, 3 weeks after the funeral, Emily returned home late from work to find Margaret and Ethan in the kitchen together. She paused in the hallway, unseen, as her eyes caught the flicker of candlelight. Margaret was pouring whiskey into 2 glasses. Ethan accepted one without a word. They sat across from each other, the silence between them oddly intimate. The tension was subtle, but palpable, like a stretched wire ready to snap. "I couldn't sleep last night," Margaret said, her voice low. "I kept hearing the wind under the door. It sounded like Richard was trying to come back in." Ethan took a sip of the whiskey. "I still hear him too." She looked up at him. Her eyes were no longer sharp, no longer the stoic steel of the woman who had run the household for decades. They were soft, fragile, exhausted. "I don't know who I am without him." Ethan didn't know what to say, so he said the worst thing. "You still have us." Margaret let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. "Us," she echoed, shaking her head. The moment stretched long and slow. Emily backed away, not sure why her heart was racing. She wasn't supposed to feel jealous, not of a grieving mother-in-law. Later that night, she lay awake in bed while Ethan took a shower. The sound of water masked her thoughts, but not her instincts. Something about the way Margaret had looked at Ethan, like she needed him in a way that was no longer maternal. The rain returned the following week. It didn't stop for 4 days. Margaret began to rejoin the family for dinner again. She made polite conversation, smiled softly at Emily, and even complimented the lasagna. "You've always been good in the kitchen," she said to Emily, who nearly choked on her wine. "Thank you," Emily replied, recovering quickly. Ethan smiled, relieved to see some semblance of peace. He thought, foolishly, that perhaps the worst had passed. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Margaret knocked softly on Ethan's door. "Can we talk?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Now." She nodded. He stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. They stood under the dim sconce light, casting long shadows on the wooden floors. "I just wanted to thank you," Margaret said. "For what?" "For being here. For not abandoning me. Richard was always so sure you'd grow cold as soon as things got hard." That's not true, Ethan said, suddenly defensive. I know, she whispered. I know that now. She leaned in and touched his arm, just lightly, but it sent something sharp down his spine. Good night, she said. Good night, he replied, his voice tight. She disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Ethan returned to bed and lay beside Emily, staring at the ceiling. He didn't touch her. He didn't sleep. The night of the incident came without warning. No thunderclap. No shouting. Just the quiet crack of a boundary crossing in the silence of grief and confusion. It happened in the parlor, late, after another bottle of whiskey, after another vinyl spun to its end. Neither of them would speak of it afterward. Neither of them could. The next morning, Margaret made coffee like always. Ethan went for a run. Emily slept in, unaware that the foundation beneath their family had begun to shift ever so slightly. And somewhere inside the Collins house, something had been broken that no one could fix. Not ever. Ethan couldn't look at her. The morning after it happened, he avoided the kitchen. He skipped coffee. He didn't check his phone. He laced up his running shoes in silence and left the house before the sun even rose. The cold air bit at his skin as he jogged down the empty streets of Portland, trying to outrun what he had done. But shame doesn't sweat out. It clings, tight and persistent. Back at the house, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, staring into her cup of black coffee, steam curling around her face like smoke. Her lips were pressed together, unmoving. Her eyes held none of the softness from the night before. Only silence. That strange, oppressive silence. Emily woke late that morning. When she came down the stairs in her slippers, she found Margaret exactly like that. Still, quiet, almost statuesque. Emily hesitated. Morning, she offered gently. Margaret looked up. A second too late. Good morning, dear. You slept well. Emily nodded. She poured herself tea, her hands slightly trembling for no reason she could name. She sat across from her mother-in-law, watching the older woman closely. There was something different, but not something Emily could name. Only a slight shift in the way Margaret's shoulders hunched, in the way her fingers tapped once, twice, and stopped, like a piano key struck in the wrong key. Where's Ethan? Went running, Margaret said without looking up. He left early. Oh, Emily stirred her tea. He's been doing that more lately. He needs space, Margaret said. Men do. When they carry things they don't know how to speak about. Emily frowned. What do you mean? Margaret shook her head slowly. Nothing. Just an old woman rambling. But the words had a weight, and Emily felt them settle in her chest. Ethan didn't return home until noon. When he did, he went straight to the shower and stayed there for nearly 40 minutes. The water scalded his back, but the guilt was deeper than skin. No amount of heat could sear it out. When he finally came down to eat, Emily had already made sandwiches. She handed him one wordlessly. He took it with a thank you, avoided her eyes, and ate in silence. Margaret remained in her room the rest of the day. That became a pattern. Days passed. They never spoke about it. Not one word. Not one glance that lingered too long. Not one apology. Not even a suggestion of confession. It was as if that night had folded itself into the drywall of the house, hidden between the beams and floorboards like a trapped animal, waiting to rot or escape. Ethan tried to act normal. He helped with chores. He took longer shifts at the hospital. He slept in the same bed as Emily, though farther toward the edge now. He kissed her goodnight, but never made love again. Margaret resumed her routines. Her piano practice returned in the afternoons. She baked bread. She made calls to church friends. She started sewing again. From the outside, she appeared to be healing. But inside, something had solidified, frozen in the aftermath of an unforgivable moment. And Emily watched. A month after Richard's funeral, Emily came home early from work. She wasn't supposed to. A meeting had been canceled last minute. She felt a strange desire to surprise Ethan with dinner. Something spontaneous. Light. Maybe a reminder of how they used to be before the house became a grave. She parked in the driveway, walked to the front door quietly, and stepped inside. Voices. Not raised. Not shouting. Just two voices murmuring in the kitchen. She stopped at the hallway corner. Margaret, it can't happen again. Ethan, it won't. A pause. Margaret again. I should have stopped it. Ethan, I should have never. Silence. Emily felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. She didn't move. She didn't cry. She simply turned and walked out the front door. That night, she didn't say a word. She served dinner. She kissed Ethan's cheek. She laughed once at a bad joke. But her heart was folding inward, silently and with precision. Weeks turned into months. Margaret announced she would be spending some time in California, visiting a cousin in Santa Barbara. The idea felt sudden, but not unreasonable. Emily nodded, even offered to drive her to the airport. Ethan, however, looked uneasy. Are you sure that's what you need? Margaret smiled thinly. Distance can cleanse. Don't you agree? He didn't answer. She left 2 days later. Emily helped her pack. Folded blouses. Tucked in a photo of Richard. At the airport, they hugged, and for the first time in weeks, Margaret whispered into Emily's ear. Take care of Ethan. He's more fragile than he lets on. Emily pulled back. Of course. She meant it. At least, she thought she did. Margaret was gone for 3 months. Ethan seemed lighter. For a time, things felt easier. Emily and he even went out to dinner once, shared a bottle of wine, laughed about old college stories. But the shadow never left. It lived in corners. It hovered in reflections. It grew inside the space between their words. Then, one Friday afternoon, Margaret returned, unannounced. Ethan opened the door, stunned. She stood there with a baby, a newborn, swaddled in soft gray blankets. Quiet, asleep. This is Liam, she said. Emily came to the door behind Ethan, eyes widening. Whose child is this? She asked slowly. Margaret looked at her, straight into her. He's ours, she said softly. Neither of them spoke. Emily's heart thudded once. Hard. Ours, as an adopted? She asked. Margaret nodded. A closed adoption. Private. I felt empty without something to love. The cousin in California helped arrange it. Emily stared at the baby. He looked nothing like Margaret. But something flickered behind Ethan's eyes. A flash of recognition. A twitch of guilt. She saw it. Memorized it. Then Emily stepped aside and said, Welcome home. Inside, the house held its breath again. Liam was quiet. Too quiet. In the first few weeks after Margaret returned, Emily found herself strangely unsettled by the stillness of the baby. He rarely cried. He rarely smiled. He just watched the world with wide, dark eyes that seemed too knowing for someone who had only just arrived. Margaret doted on him endlessly. She carried him through the house like a priestess with a sacred relic. Her voice, once clipped and formal, had softened into lullabies and whispered stories. She rarely let anyone else hold him. I don't want to confuse him, she said when Emily offered to take Liam for a while. He needs to bond. Early attachment is crucial. Emily said nothing, but the words stung. Confuse him? She was the one confused. Margaret's story didn't make sense. A closed adoption? Arranged by a cousin no one had ever met? No paperwork. No mention of home visits or legal proceedings. And why, above all, had she not told them before arriving with the baby? Ethan's silence was worse. He didn't ask questions. He didn't protest. He held Liam when asked, gently, mechanically, but his eyes rarely met the child's. There was a restraint in him that Emily couldn't ignore. And yet he never once questioned Margaret. That silence, shared, deliberate, was louder than any confession. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emily stood in the doorway of Liam's nursery. The room had been rearranged in Margaret's absence. The guest room was transformed, soft blue walls, white crib, handmade quilt, shelves lined with picture books. Margaret had done it all in a matter of days. Emily approached the crib slowly. Liam was sleeping, hands curled beside his head like twin blossoms. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He was beautiful, and yet something gnawed at her, some deep, buried instinct. She leaned over, brushing a finger along the baby's cheek. His skin was warm, soft, too perfect to belong to a story built on lies. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Emily turned sharply. Margaret stood in the hallway, wrapped in a robe, her eyes hard to read. I didn't mean to wake you, Emily said. Margaret stepped into the room. You didn't. I don't sleep much these days. They stood in silence, both looking at Liam. Then Margaret said quietly, Do you think I'm too old to raise a child? Emily hesitated. I think it's unexpected. But people do unexpected things all the time. Margaret smiled faintly. He gives me a reason to get up in the morning. Emily wanted to ask, and what about us? But she didn't. Instead, she said, He's lucky to have you. Not lucky, Margaret replied, eyes fixed on the baby. Fated. Emily didn't know what to make of that. 2 weeks later, Emily found herself in the attic. She had gone looking for a photo album, Something to show Liam when he was older. A picture of Richard, perhaps. Something to help him understand where he'd landed. She opened a worn cardboard box labeled R. Collins office and began sorting through files, papers, and notebooks. Beneath a stack of old tax returns, she found a leather folder marked medical. Inside were several sealed envelopes. Most were old hospital bills. But one stood out, a discharge document from a women's clinic in Sacramento, dated 5 months ago. The name, Margaret Collins. Her blood ran cold. The document listed Margaret as both patient and guardian of newborn, male, delivered full term. Emily sat back, staring at the paper. The weight of it settled like a stone in her stomach. She read it again. Then again. No mention of adoption. No reference to another mother. No legal handoff. Margaret had given birth. Full term. Liam wasn't adopted. Liam was hers. Emily pressed her hands against her face. Her breath was shallow. Every part of her wanted to deny what she'd read. To dismiss it as a mistake, a clerical error, anything other than what it meant. But the truth didn't care about comfort. Margaret had lied. And Ethan, he had known. He had to know. Emily stood slowly, gripping the folder like a weapon. The attic felt colder now. The dust thicker. The air thinner. She went back downstairs, quietly, like a thief in her own home. She hid the folder in her closet, behind a stack of books. Then she went to bed. She didn't speak a word. Days passed. She said nothing. She watched instead. She watched the way Ethan avoided Liam's gaze. The way he flinched when the baby cried. The way he left the room whenever Margaret spoke too sweetly. She watched Margaret. How fiercely she protected Liam. How she whispered to him behind closed doors. How she flinched whenever Emily came too close. It was all there. The story behind the silence. Emily began taking notes. She logged times, conversations, photos. She began documenting things the way a lawyer prepares a case. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she needed truth. Truth to protect Liam. Truth to protect herself. Because one day, the child would ask. And Emily needed to be ready. Then came the day she asked Ethan directly. They were in the kitchen. Late. The rain drummed steadily against the windows. Why didn't you tell me she was pregnant? He froze, knife hovering over a half-sliced apple. What are you talking about? Emily stepped closer. Don't lie. I found the discharge papers. She gave birth, Ethan. Not adopted. Gave birth. Ethan put down the knife slowly. I didn't know how to tell you, he said. Her voice cracked. So you just let me believe she found a baby? That we were suddenly raising a child with no questions asked? I was scared. Emily laughed, sharp, bitter. Of what? Of losing everything. You. Us. The life we built. She stared at him. You already lost it. He looked down. She waited. Waited for him to deny the next thing. To lie again. But he didn't. She told me she was pregnant 2 months after Richard died, he said. I didn't believe her at first. I thought she'd lost her mind. Emily whispered. And then you believed her. He nodded once. I begged her not to go through with it. I thought, if we buried it, it would die. But it didn't, Emily said. It's breathing. Right now. In the next room. Neither of them spoke. In the silence, Emily felt something inside her shift. Not break. Not yet. But something had begun to unravel. The next morning, Emily fed Liam before Margaret could come downstairs. She warmed the bottle, changed his diaper, and held him close in the soft light spilling through the kitchen window. The baby's small hand curled around her finger, his breath steady and sweet. For a moment, Emily allowed herself to forget everything. The lies, the betrayal, the rotting foundation beneath their lives. For a moment, it was just her and him. A mother and her child. Margaret came in 15 minutes later, her expression freezing mid-smile when she saw Liam already fed and burped in Emily's arms. You're up early, she said, tone carefully neutral. I thought I'd take care of his morning routine today, Emily said, adjusting Liam's blanket. Let you sleep in. Margaret tilted her head. You usually leave that to me. Things change. Emily didn't offer the baby. Margaret's eyes lingered on Liam, then drifted to the coffee pot. She poured herself a cup without saying another word. For the rest of the morning, the air between them was charged. Emily started taking more time off work. She claimed exhaustion, used saved-up PTO, and leaned into her new role as Liam's caretaker. She scheduled his pediatric appointments. She read parenting books. She started a photo journal, documenting his growth with quiet dedication. Margaret didn't protest. At first. She watched. She hovered. She made small corrections. He prefers the bottle warmer on level 2. He likes his blanket tucked tighter. That lullaby overstimulates him before naps. Each comment was made with a smile, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. Emily didn't argue. She logged it all. Quietly. Meticulously. One afternoon, Emily came into the nursery and found Margaret sitting in the rocking chair, holding Liam. The baby was asleep on her chest. Margaret's eyes were closed, her lips moving in a soft, unintelligible whisper. Emily paused in the doorway. Something in her clenched. "Nap time's over," she said gently. Margaret opened her eyes, but didn't move. "He just fell asleep. He needs to eat." Margaret stroked Liam's back. "He's fine." Emily stepped closer. "I'll take him now." Margaret hesitated. Then she stood and slowly handed the baby over, her arms lingering a second too long. As Emily turned to leave, Margaret said, "You're not his mother." Emily stopped. She didn't turn around. "I'm raising him," she said. "I love him. That's what matters." Margaret's voice was quiet but sharp. "Love doesn't rewrite blood." Emily turned then, eyes burning. "And blood doesn't excuse what you did." Margaret flinched, just slightly. "You think you understand everything. But you don't know what it's like to lose your entire world. To bury a husband and wake up to silence so loud it crushes you." Emily held Liam closer. "You made your choices. Now live with them. But don't think for 1 second you get to own him just because he came from your body." They stared at each other, breath shallow, tension thick between them. Liam stirred. Emily turned and left the room without another word. Ethan noticed the shift. He came home late one evening and found Emily asleep on the couch, Liam curled against her. Margaret sat in the armchair, stiff and quiet, watching them with a hollow expression. "She's shutting me out," Margaret said softly. Ethan rubbed his temples. "You lied to her, Mom. You lied to me. I told you I was pregnant. I asked for your help, and I begged you not to go through with it." Ethan snapped. Margaret stood. "You think I wanted this? You think I planned it? I don't know what to think anymore. She's turning him against me. He's a baby. She's taking him away." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "Then fight like a mother, not a child." Margaret's face hardened. "Don't lecture me on motherhood. You have no idea what it cost me to carry him. To come back here. To see your wife looking at me like I'm filth." Ethan stared at her, silent. "I need you to stand with me," she said. "You're his father." The word hung in the air. Father. Not Ethan. Not Ethan Collins. Just father. Ethan backed away. "I can't be part of this anymore. You are part of this, whether you like it or not." He turned and walked away. Margaret stood alone in the living room, the silence folding in around her like a shroud. Emily began locking the nursery door at night. She didn't explain. She didn't announce it. She simply turned the key each evening and pocketed it. When Margaret noticed, she said nothing, but her eyes followed Emily down the hallway with growing intensity. One night, Emily woke to the sound of soft footsteps outside the nursery. She sat up, heart pounding. Through the crack beneath the door, she saw shadows shifting. She held Liam tighter and whispered, "It's okay. I've got you." The footsteps faded, but sleep didn't return. One morning, Emily took Liam to the park alone. She pushed him in a stroller, watching the autumn leaves fall in waves around them. The sun was weak but bright, casting everything in a pale, golden light. She sat on a bench and held Liam in her arms. "You're mine," she whispered. "Not in the legal sense, not in the biological sense, but in every way that mattered. You're mine because I chose you, and I'll fight for you." Liam gurgled, his tiny fingers grabbing at her necklace. She kissed his forehead and closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she saw courtrooms, DNA tests, headlines, but she also saw birthdays, bedtime stories, first steps, and above it all, choices. She had made hers. Now it was time to make them official. When she got home, Margaret was waiting on the porch. "You went out without telling me," she said. "I don't have to tell you," Emily replied, stepping past her. Margaret grabbed her arm. "You're not his mother." Emily looked down at the hand on her sleeve, then up into Margaret's face. "I'm about to be." She pulled away, walked into the house, and shut the door. Margaret stayed on the porch, staring, frozen. That night, Ethan found Emily filling out paperwork. "What is this?" he asked. "Legal guardianship." He sat down. "You're serious?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I'll sign whatever you need. And that was the moment Margaret truly became an outsider. Not in law, not in title, but in the soul of the home. She had created life to fill a void. But now, it was that life, Liam, that would define who stayed in the house and who would be asked to leave. Emily sat at the dining room table, the stack of documents before her arranged with the kind of precision that only comes from deep, methodical anger. Each paper had been read twice, signed once, and double-checked for completeness. She'd contacted a lawyer, discreetly, quietly, without telling Ethan or Margaret. The woman, a sharp-spoken family law attorney named Helen Pierce, had listened to Emily's story with a practiced calm. "You're not legally related to the child," she'd said, folding her hands on the desk. "But you've raised him. You've fed him, changed him, soothed him to sleep. In the court's eyes, those actions count. They matter." "Do I have a case?" Emily asked. Helen gave her a level look. "You have more than a case. You have a cause." Now, with the preliminary forms in hand, guardianship petition, affidavit of care, statements of concern, Emily was ready to act. It was time to stop reacting. Time to move first. Margaret found her at the table that evening, papers spread out, pen in hand. "What's all this?" Margaret asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Guardianship petition," Emily said, not looking up. "Legal documentation." "Of what?" Emily glanced at her. "Of what's already true." Margaret stepped closer. "You're going to the courts?" "Yes." "You're going to take my child and make him yours on paper?" Emily set her pen down and looked her dead in the eyes. "He's already mine in every way that matters. I'm just giving it structure. Permanence." Margaret's lips trembled. "You don't get to erase me. I'm not erasing you. I'm protecting him." Margaret shook her head, stepping back. "No, no, this isn't right." Emily gathered the papers into a neat stack. "What's not right, Margaret, is lying about where he came from. What's not right is keeping the truth buried in silence while we all live in the fallout. I'm done living in your shadows. You don't understand." "No," Emily interrupted. "I understand exactly what happened, and I've chosen to stay for him. I didn't walk away. I didn't leave him or use him to bandage a hole inside myself. I chose him, and now I'm choosing to protect him with everything I've got." Margaret's expression crumpled. She turned and walked out of the room without another word. Later that night, Ethan came home to find Margaret pacing the kitchen, her eyes wild, her fingers twitching at the hem of her sweater. "She's filing for guardianship," she said the moment he stepped through the door. "She's trying to steal him." Ethan blinked. "What?" "She's trying to make it legal, Ethan. She wants to cut me out completely." "She's not cutting you out," he said carefully. "She's securing what she already does every day. She's taking my child." Ethan sighed and rubbed his face. "You shouldn't have lied to her, Mom. You should have told her the truth from the start. You think this is my fault." He looked at her. Really looked. "You gave birth to your son's child. You hid it. Then you handed him to us like it was charity. You made me complicit, and you're surprised she doesn't trust you." Margaret stepped back like he'd slapped her. "She's manipulating you," she whispered. "No," Ethan said. "She's saving us." For the next week, the house became a battlefield of silence. Margaret barely left her room. Emily rose early, cared for Liam, made calls to the attorney, and documented everything. Feeding times, interactions, behavior changes. She was building a wall of proof. Ethan floated somewhere between. He slept in the guest room now. Each morning, he asked if Emily needed help. Each time, she said no. He understood. He didn't belong in her space anymore. 3 days before the court meeting, Margaret snapped. It was 2 a.m. when Emily woke to the sound of Liam crying. Sharp, sudden, different. Not hunger, not discomfort. Panic. She bolted from her room. The nursery door was open. Inside, Margaret stood beside the crib, Liam in her arms, rocking him fast, too fast. "I need him to stop crying," she whispered. "He was never like this with me. He knows. He knows you're taking him." "Give him to me," Emily said, voice trembling. "He's mine." "Margaret, no one else understands. No one knows what it's like to carry that shame, to hold that weight alone. I gave him life. You're trying to take it. I'm trying to keep it." They stared at each other in the half-dark. Emily took a step forward. Margaret hesitated. Then slowly, reluctantly, she handed Liam over. He buried his face in Emily's neck, still whimpering. Emily backed away. "You need help," she said softly. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I needed you. Both of you. And now I'm the monster. Emily didn't answer. She closed the door behind her and locked it. The court date arrived. Helen sat beside Emily in the waiting room, calm and unreadable. Ethan sat 2 chairs away, head bowed, hands clasped. Margaret never showed. When Emily's name was called, she rose and walked into the room with steady steps. The judge, a woman in her 60s, read through the documents carefully. You've been the primary caregiver for the child since he was a newborn? Yes, Your Honor. And the birth mother is currently residing in your home? She's no longer emotionally stable. The judge's eyes lifted. Are there any allegations of harm? No physical harm, Emily said carefully. But emotionally, the child is showing distress when removed from my care. I have documentation from a pediatrician and therapist. The judge nodded. The hearing was brief. At the end, she said, I'll be granting temporary guardianship pending further evaluation. Emily's breath caught. The gavel came down. And just like that, the truth had structure. When Emily returned home that evening, the house was dark. Ethan sat on the porch, staring out at the road. She left, he said, packed a bag, and called a cab. Emily sat beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Ethan said, She's not well. I know. She'll be back. I know. They sat there, side by side, the autumn wind brushing past them. Inside, Liam slept in his crib. Outside, everything was still. For now. Margaret returned 12 days after the court hearing. Emily heard the cab door slam from the kitchen. She didn't move. She continued chopping carrots, slowly, steadily, each slice thudding against the cutting board like a clock, counting down something inevitable. Through the window, she saw the familiar figure step out with a small suitcase. Margaret looked thinner, sharper somehow, like time had filed her edges instead of softening them. Her clothes were pressed, her hair done. A woman prepared for something. Emily didn't greet her at the door. Margaret let herself in. I came to see him, she said without preamble. Emily turned, wiping her hands on a towel. He's napping. I won't wake him. You're not allowed to be alone with him. Margaret raised an eyebrow. I'm aware. They stood in the kitchen like 2 opposing lawyers during recess. The house, once full of unspoken rules, now echoed with formalities and legal boundaries. Emily poured herself a glass of water. You're staying where? A rental near the river. You're not staying here. I didn't ask to. Emily took a sip. Then why are you here? Margaret set down her purse slowly. Because I'm still his mother. No, Emily said. You're the woman who birthed him. I'm the one raising him. Margaret's jaw tightened. You've always wanted control. Emily smiled bitterly. No, I wanted truth. But since I never got that, I'll settle for custody. For a moment, Margaret's face twisted, something between heartbreak and fury, but it passed quickly. She picked up her purse again. I'll be back tomorrow, she said. With a lawyer. Emily didn't answer. She just watched the door close behind her. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Liam stirred at 2 a.m., and she went to him, holding him close as he dozed against her shoulder. His breath was warm, his body soft, trusting. He had no idea what kind of storm was circling outside his nursery walls. She looked down at his face and wondered, not for the first time, if he would grow up resenting her. If one day, he'd stare at her with Margaret's eyes and ask questions she couldn't answer. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why didn't you tell me? Emily pressed her lips to his forehead. Because I was trying to protect you. But in trying to protect him, she had begun building a version of the same cage Margaret had tried to live in. A cage of silence, decisions made behind closed doors, truths softened or buried altogether. How different was she really? She closed her eyes. The baby breathed. Ethan didn't come home that weekend. He texted twice. Once to say he needed time. The second to say he was staying at a hotel downtown. Emily didn't reply. She didn't have the energy to save him anymore. Monday morning, Margaret returned. This time, she didn't come alone. Her lawyer was a man named Peter Vance, gray suit, clipped speech, cold eyes. He handed Emily an envelope at the door. Formal request for visitation review, he said. Filed this morning. Emily read it carefully. Margaret stood behind him, watching with unreadable eyes. I have a right, Margaret said quietly. You had your chance, Emily replied. Peter cleared his throat. Our client would like to avoid escalation, but she is prepared to fight. Emily folded the paper. So am I. The man nodded once and left. Margaret lingered. "Can I see him?" she asked. Emily considered it. Then, against every instinct, she stepped aside. Margaret entered the living room slowly, sitting on the couch like it belonged to someone else. Emily brought Liam down, wrapped in his soft gray blanket. The baby blinked sleepily at the light. Margaret held out her hands. Emily hesitated, then placed the baby into her arms. Margaret cradled him like porcelain. "You remember me?" she whispered. Liam yawned. Emily stood close, arms crossed. "He's healthy," Margaret said softly. "You've done well." "I know." He laughs now. That deep little belly laugh. "Yes. He looks like you when he smiles." Emily paused. "He's not mine." "Not really." Margaret looked up. "He is now," she said. They sat in silence. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel combative, just tired. Margaret rocked Liam gently, then handed him back without protest. "I won't stop trying," she said. Emily met her gaze. "Then I won't stop protecting him." In the weeks that followed, lawyers exchanged motions. Custody evaluations were scheduled. Home visits were arranged. Emily scrubbed every surface in the house twice, made binders of medical records, feeding schedules, photos, journals. Margaret brought in character witnesses, old friends, a retired pastor, a neighbor who barely remembered her. It was war in slow motion. Every hearing was a performance. Every document a line in a script written in shame, love, and fear. Ethan remained absent. Emily learned not to miss him. She learned how to file affidavits, how to speak without shaking, how to stand when her knees wanted to give out. She grew a spine made of paper and steel. She stopped wondering who the better mother was, because it didn't matter. What mattered was who showed up. And every morning, Emily did. Then came the night Margaret brought a gift. She appeared at the door holding a wrapped box. "It's for Liam," she said. "No tricks, just a gift." Emily let her in. Inside the box was a handmade quilt, stitched with careful hands, tiny animals dancing across the squares. Margaret set it on the rocking chair in the nursery without saying a word. "He'll need stories," she said, "about where he came from. You won't be able to keep it from him forever." "I know." Margaret looked tired. "Old?" Emily asked, "Why did you do it?" Margaret didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, "Because he was the only piece of your father I had left. And Ethan, he didn't stop me." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "And what about me?" Margaret's eyes filled. "You were always too good, too steady. I thought you'd hold us together, even after what I did." Emily shook her head. "You broke everything." Margaret nodded once. "I know." She left quietly. The quilt remained. That night, Emily wrapped Liam in it and held him close until morning. The day before the final custody hearing, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Emily, handwritten in familiar, looping cursive. The return address was Margaret's rental near the river. Emily opened it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table where so much of this war had begun. Inside was a single sheet of ivory paper and a photograph. The photo was old, faded, a snapshot of Ethan as a child, maybe 4 years old, grinning from a tire swing in the backyard. Margaret stood behind him, arms outstretched, mouth open mid-laugh. On the back of the photo, in the same cursive handwriting, was a single line. "He used to look at me like that." Emily turned the letter over and read. "Emily, by the time you read this, I'll have already decided whether or not I can sit in that courtroom again and watch someone else define me. I've made peace with being hated, but I can't make peace with being erased. You're a good mother. I see it now more than I ever did before. You're also strong in a way I never was. That's what scares me most. You fight for Liam like he's yours. Because he is. And if you win, I hope you'll teach him to love me for what I was, not what I did. Because children don't just inherit blood. They inherit silence. And I've already passed on too much of that. Emily folded the letter and placed it next to her coffee. Her hands trembled, but her face remained still. Across the room, Liam played on the carpet, stacking soft blocks into clumsy towers. He squealed when they fell, clapped, and started over. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know what had already been done. The next morning, the hearing room was full. Margaret arrived alone, dressed in a simple navy suit, hair pulled back, eyes unreadable. Ethan entered 10 minutes later, unexpectedly. He looked thinner, older. The weight of months had settled into his face. Emily turned to look at him. He met her gaze, then nodded slightly. No words, just acknowledgement. The judge entered, flipping through documents as she sat. We're here today to finalize guardianship status of the minor child, Liam Collins. Present are Emily Collins, petitioner, Margaret Collins, respondent, and Ethan Collins, father. Emily's stomach twisted. This was it. The judge began with formalities. Then she asked each party to speak. Margaret went first. I'm not here to argue biology, she said quietly. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt my son. I hurt Emily. And I've put Liam in the center of something he didn't ask for. But I love him. And I wanted him because I didn't want to disappear. She paused, voice trembling. I've already lost my husband. I was losing my son. I didn't want to lose everything. Liam was my way back to life. But I see now. I held on too tightly. And in doing so, I pushed everyone away. Silence followed. Then it was Emily's turn. She stood slowly, holding a small note card but never looking at it. I didn't ask for any of this, she said. I didn't ask to raise a child born of pain and confusion. But once he was here, I couldn't turn away. I didn't fall in love with his bloodline. I fell in love with him. Her voice steadied. I bathed him, fed him, walked the floor at 3 a.m. when his teeth came in. I know the mole behind his left ear, the sound he makes when he's falling asleep, the way he startles at loud noises. I know him. I am his mother. She took a breath. I'm not here to punish Margaret. I'm here to protect Liam. And if that means I have to be the villain in her story, so be it. I'll carry that, so he doesn't have to. The judge looked at Ethan. He rose slowly. My name is on the birth certificate, he said. But I don't deserve to be called a father. I let things happen. I let silence take the place of action. I lied. I failed both of them. He looked at Emily. She didn't fail. She stepped in. She stood up. And she deserves to raise him, no matter what the biology says. He sat down. The judge nodded. I've heard enough. She tapped her pen against the folder in front of her. Temporary guardianship is now permanent. Full parental rights are granted to Emily Collins. Visitation terms to be negotiated separately. The gavel fell. And just like that, it was over. Or so Emily thought. That night, Ethan didn't come home. Instead, he left a note on the kitchen counter. Emily, thank you for saving him. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. I can't stay here. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'll check in. And if you'll let me, someday I'd like to earn back the right to be in his life. Emily read it once. Then again. Then placed it in the same drawer as Margaret's letter. She stood at Liam's crib that night longer than usual, watching him sleep. His fingers twitched. His legs kicked slightly beneath the blanket. Dreams, probably. Harmless ones. She whispered, "You're safe now." And for the first time in months, she believed it. Margaret moved out of the rental 2 weeks later. No forwarding address. No goodbye. But she sent one final package. A small wooden box. Inside was a silver rattle with Liam's name engraved on it, and a short note. I know you'll tell him who I was. I just hope someday he'll forgive me for who I became. Emily kept the box. Not because she forgave her, but because Liam deserved to have the whole story, eventually. He deserved not just love, but the truth. Even if it hurt. Especially if it hurt. Because silence, like blood, was something you could inherit. And she refused to pass it on. Years passed like wind against glass, quiet but persistent. Liam turned 5. Emily enrolled him in kindergarten at a small charter school with bright walls and teachers who called her Mom without hesitation. No one questioned the lack of a father, the older-than-average mother, or the silence in Liam's paperwork under biological parents. Portland was forgiving that way, and Emily was grateful for it. Grateful for every ordinary morning, every spilled bowl of cereal, every finger-painted picture brought home in sticky hands. The chaos of parenting, she had learned, was far easier to navigate than the chaos of the past. The house had changed. Ethan's old clothes were long gone. Margaret's rocking chair had been donated. The nursery became a real bedroom. Life pressed forward like a tide, slow but certain. Emily worked from home now, freelance writing, mostly parenting blogs and copy editing manuals. It paid the bills and kept her close. Close enough to hear Liam laugh, cry, and stumble through the world with wide eyes and open arms. They were happy, or as close to happy as Emily believed people like her were allowed to be. Until the questions began. It started small. At 6, Liam came home from school one day holding a family tree assignment. "We have to draw it," he said, kicking off his shoes. "But I don't know who to put for the other boxes." Emily froze in the middle of cutting carrots. "What boxes?" she asked, keeping her voice light. Like, real mom and dad. Birth once. I said you're my mom, and that's enough. But Mrs. Dunn said I should ask. Emily set the knife down. Liam stared at her, waiting. She crouched beside him, brushing a curl from his forehead. You know how some kids come from their mom's belly, she said. He nodded. Well, you came into my heart first. His nose scrunched. But that's not what the paper says. Emily smiled. Sometimes papers don't understand feelings. He thought about that, then shrugged. Okay. He ran off to play with his Legos. But Emily stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the untouched cutting board. As Liam grew, so did the questions. Why don't I have a dad? Why don't I look like you? Why do other people have grandmas and I don't? Emily answered what she could, sidestepped what she couldn't. She told him about Richard, Ethan's father, how he had died before Liam was born. She said Ethan had gone away and wasn't ready to be a dad. She never mentioned Margaret. Not yet. She wasn't sure how. Because how do you explain to a child that his biological grandmother was also his mother? That his father was both a caretaker and a perpetrator? That love and shame had tangled so violently they birthed him into silence? No picture book covered that. No parenting blog offered guidance. So Emily waited, hoping, foolishly, that more time would make the telling easier. It didn't. On Liam's 8th birthday, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single birthday card. No signature, no message, just a drawing of a bird in flight and the words, "Some things are born to be free. Happy birthday." Liam didn't understand, but Emily did. Margaret. She tucked the card away in a drawer, but she didn't throw it out. Later that year, Liam came home from school crying. Lena said, I don't have a real family, he sobbed. She said adopted kids don't count. Emily held him, rocked him, whispered until the tears slowed. Then she looked him in the eye. You are real, she said. You are mine. And no matter how you got here, I choose you every single day. But who made me? He whispered. Her throat closed. Someone who couldn't raise you. Someone who loved you the only way they knew how, by letting you go. He stared at her. Will I ever meet them? Emily hesitated. Maybe one day, if you want. He nodded slowly. Do you know who they are? She took a breath. Yes. He didn't ask more, but the seed had been planted. By 10, Liam had developed the quiet self-awareness of a boy who sensed there were things the adults around him weren't saying. He didn't press, but he observed. He watched Emily more closely when she was quiet. He noticed how she lingered on old photos, how she sometimes paused before answering even simple questions. One night, he said, I know there's something you're not telling me. Emily looked up from her book. He sat on the couch beside her, legs tucked under himself. I'm old enough now, he said. She stared at him and realized he was right. She set the book down. Okay, she said. His eyes widened. I'm not going to tell you everything tonight, but I'll tell you the truth. All of it. When the time is right. He swallowed. When Emily took his hand. When you're strong enough to hold it without letting it break you. He nodded, then leaned into her side. They sat like that until the sun dipped low and the house filled with shadows. That night, Emily took out a box from her closet. Inside were letters, legal documents, photos, one of Ethan, one of Margaret, one of the hospital Liam was born in. She gathered them into a new folder. She labeled it, for Liam, when ready. Then she slid it back into the drawer. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from finally letting go of the idea that silence was protection. She couldn't save him from the past, but she could make sure it never swallowed him whole. Liam turned 13 in late October. The day was quiet, like most birthdays had become. No party, just cake, a few close friends, and a new pair of running shoes he'd been eyeing for weeks. He smiled when he opened the box, hugged Emily, and said, Thanks, Mom. But that night, after the guests had gone and the cake had been wrapped in foil, Emily found him sitting alone on the porch steps. He was holding the same envelope she had hidden in her closet for years. The one labeled, for Liam, when ready. Her heart stopped. Where did you find that? She asked. He didn't turn. In your drawer. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a phone charger. Emily walked slowly toward him, sat beside him. You opened it? I did. He stared out into the dark yard. I read everything. Emily folded her hands in her lap. She waited. I don't understand all of it, he said. But I think I understand enough. He looked at her now, eyes older than 13, eyes that had inherited silence and now carried the weight of it. She was my mother. Emily nodded. And Ethan, he was my father. Yes. Liam looked away again. She was your mother-in-law. Yes. He didn't speak for a while. Emily reached out, but didn't touch him. Do you hate me? Liam blinked hard. No. I just don't know how to feel. It's like I'm standing in a house, and someone just opened all the windows. And now everything I thought I knew is flying around. Emily looked at him. You're allowed to feel all of it. Confused. Angry. Hurt. Lost. There's no wrong reaction. He turned to her. But you never told me. I was waiting for the right time. There's never a right time for this. She smiled sadly. No, there isn't. He stared down at the envelope. She wrote me letters. She did. Did she love me? Emily's voice caught in her throat. Yes, she said, after a long pause. But not in the way a child deserves to be loved. Not in the way you needed. Liam looked up. But you did. She reached for his hand. I tried. The following week, Liam asked if he could meet her. Emily didn't have to ask who. She took a deep breath and nodded. If she agrees. They didn't have a phone number. No address. Just the old postmark on the birthday card. Emily contacted Helen Pierce again, the lawyer who had helped her win guardianship. I'll see what I can do, Helen said. But you need to be sure. This can't be undone. I'm not doing it for me, Emily said. I know, Helen replied. That's what worries me. It took 2 months. Then, one afternoon, Emily received an email. Subject, Margaret Collins, response. She'll meet. One time. Public location. No press. Just you, the boy, and her. 1 hour. Attached was a date, a location, and one final note. Tell him to come alone if he wants the truth. Emily read it twice before calling Liam downstairs. He didn't speak after hearing it. He simply said, I'll go. The meeting took place in a small botanical garden outside Eugene. A neutral place. Peaceful. No memories buried in the dirt. Emily sat on a bench nearby, close enough to see but not to hear. Liam walked ahead alone, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders tight. Margaret sat waiting on a stone bench near the koi pond. She was older now, gray streaked through her hair. Her eyes were tired, but alert. When she saw Liam, she stood slowly. For a long time, they didn't speak, just looked at each other. Then Liam sat beside her. They talked for nearly an hour. Emily didn't move. She watched as Liam asked questions, watched as Margaret answered. She saw him shake his head, then nod. Saw her cry once, subtly. Saw his hands clench, then relax. When it was over, Liam stood first. He didn't hug her, but he didn't walk away angry. When he returned to Emily, he simply said, Let's go. They didn't speak on the ride home. That night, Emily made him his favorite, mac and cheese with extra Parmesan. He barely touched it. Instead, he sat at the table, staring at the wall. She's sad, he said finally. She always has been, Emily replied. She said she doesn't expect forgiveness. Emily looked at him. Do you? He thought about it. I don't know, but I think I understand her. Then he said something she didn't expect. She said you saved her too. Emily blinked. What? She said if you hadn't taken me, she might have drowned. Not just legally, but as a person. Emily stared at him. I don't think she meant to say it, Liam continued. But she meant it. Emily nodded slowly. Silence returned. But it was a new kind of silence. Not shame. Not avoidance. Just space. Room. For both of them. Over the next few months, Liam didn't bring Margaret up again. But Emily could see the shift in him. He moved with more certainty, asked fewer questions, but thought longer before speaking. There was a quietness in him, not born of fear but of thought. He was becoming his own person. And in that, Emily found both pride and ache. Because he was hers. But not completely. Never completely. No child ever is. One day, as they drove home from school, Liam asked, If I ever want to see her again, would that be okay? Emily didn't hesitate. Yes. He nodded, then asked, Would you come with me next time? She smiled. If you want me to. He did. The house was quiet again. Not with tension. Not with secrets. Just the kind of stillness that follows long storms and leaves everything touched, changed. Liam was 17 now. He had grown tall, with Margaret's cheekbones and Ethan's wary eyes. But it was Emily's calm that lived in his voice, in the way he moved through the world. Not brash, not loud, but certain. He was applying to colleges, some nearby, some far. He wanted to study psychology. Not because I want to fix people, he once told Emily, but because I want to understand how they break. She didn't cry when he said it, but she wanted to. because there were some truths so sharp they cut without warning. Margaret hadn't written in over a year. After the meeting at the garden, she and Liam had exchanged 2 or 3 letters, brief, gentle, hesitant. Then nothing. Emily didn't press. She didn't need to. Because silence, she had learned, wasn't always absence. Sometimes it was grace. And maybe Margaret had finally found hers. Or maybe she was just tired of rewriting a story that had already been told too many times. One evening in winter, Liam came home with a box. He placed it on the kitchen table. "I went to see her," he said. Emily turned. "When?" "Last weekend, while you were in Seattle." Emily nodded. She hadn't even noticed he'd gone anywhere. He'd become good at slipping out and in, like memory. "She's not well," Liam said. "What happened?" "She's sick. Cancer. Lungs." Emily sat down. "She didn't tell me. She didn't want to." He opened the box. Inside were photographs, dozens, maybe hundreds. Margaret at various ages. With Richard. With Ethan. Holding Liam as an infant. "She said these are mine," Liam said. "And yours, if you want them." Emily picked up a photo of Liam sleeping in Margaret's arms. He couldn't have been more than 3 months old. Margaret looked younger, almost peaceful. "She asked me a question," Liam said. Emily looked up. "She asked me what I think makes someone a mother." Emily didn't speak. "And I told her it's the person who doesn't leave when things get hard. The person who stays even when they're tired. Who tells you the truth even when it hurts. Who doesn't need to be right to love you." He met her gaze. "She said that's who you were." Emily's throat closed. "She also said you saved her life. Not by forgiving her, but by refusing to become her." Emily looked down at the photo again. "She's right," she whispered. Liam sat beside her. "She doesn't want a funeral. No flowers. No poems. Just to be forgotten quietly." Emily nodded. "That sounds like her. I don't want to forget her." "You don't have to." He rested his hand over hers. "She was part of my beginning. You were all the rest." And in that moment, Emily understood that the House of Silence wasn't about secrets. It was about what you built after the silence broke. Spring came early that year. The snow melted in March, and daffodils bloomed along the front path. Emily found herself cleaning out the attic, sorting through the past not because she had to, but because it no longer frightened her. She found Ethan's old journals in a box marked storage. She flipped through one and read a line that made her pause. "Some truths are too heavy to carry alone. But if you never speak them, you carry them forever." She closed the book and placed it in the box marked Liam. Graduation came in June. Liam walked across the stage with his usual quiet confidence. His name called out in full, Liam Henry Collins. No mention of where he came from, only where he was going. After the ceremony, Emily handed him a small envelope. Inside was a key. He looked at her, confused. "It's for the house," she said. "When you're ready to come back. If you ever want to." He held it tight. "I'll always want to." And Emily believed him. Not because she needed to, but because she had earned it. The night before he left for college, they sat on the porch, just like they had years before. Liam looked up at the stars. "I've been thinking about writing it all down," he said. "Our story. All of it." Emily raised an eyebrow. "For yourself? For anyone who feels like they come from something broken, so they know they can still become whole." Emily nodded slowly. "Do you think they'll believe it?" she asked. Liam smiled. "If they don't, that's okay. We'll still know it's true." He stood and hugged her, longer than usual, tighter. "I love you, Mom. I love you more." When he was gone, Emily stood in the doorway of the house. It felt different now. Not lighter, but honest. She walked through each room, her steps slow, her memories vivid. The nursery that had once held confusion now held nothing but peace. The dining room no longer echoed with arguments. The kitchen, once a battleground of documents and confrontation, smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. This was no longer a house of silence. It was a house of survival, of resilience, of love that refused to be undone.